Aloha. Welcome to Ably Seminar Sessions. Today, we're going to talk about escrow. And a lot of people say, what's escrow? Well, there's actually two definitions to escrow. One is a process by which the escrow process will allow a buyer and a seller to do the transaction through a disinterested third party. And that process is called the escrow process. The other definition is an escrow is a company that will then do all the paperwork. And they'll also do what they call a title search to make sure that what you're buying has clear title and there's no defects to the title. So we're going to talk about the escrow process in this seminar. What it is when you have a buyer and a seller, and both of them have a contract, and they now sign a binding contract. They may be offer, then they may be a counter, and a counter to the counter. But once they both agree, it's what they call a meeting of the minds. And the buyer and the seller says, okay, we're ready to open escrow. So the buyer's agent and the seller's agent will decide, or with the buyer and the seller, which escrow company they want to use. So now the buyer's agent and seller's agent will send the paperwork, all the binding contract, to the escrow officer. The escrow officer will then order a title search to the title department and say, hey, we have this contract. Can you please do a preliminary title search to make sure that the title is clean? And the escrow officer will then issue what they call an escrow number, a file number that they can use as a reference material. Now, what is sent to the escrow officer is the 14-page contract. And there will be escrow instructions. And there may be other documents that are going to be sent to escrow to make sure that all the proper paperwork is done. So a key component in this escrow process is to make sure that the purchase contract is written properly, that the 14-page contract we talked about is filled out so that the escrow officer knows who's paying for what expenses and when are they closing, who's going to hold title to the property, and how is the buyer going to pay for the property? Will it be cash, or will it be a small down payment and then financing? Will it be a VA loan, etc.? So all those processes, the escrow officer will now be coordinating and holding the paperwork. So the buyer's agent has to do certain things. The seller's agent has to do certain things in this escrow process. The escrow officer is a disinterested third party, and they're a neutral agent acting on behalf of the buyer and the seller to make sure the transaction goes through smoothly. And so there's a lot of responsibility on the part of the escrow officer to make sure that everything is flowing smoothly. The buyer's agent and the seller's agent will then do the quarterbacking and the coordinating. Example would be, the buyer's agent will say, hey, buyer, which loan officer are you going to use? Do you have a loan commitment letter or pre-qualification letter, or pre-approval letter? By the way, who do you want to use for home inspection? And the buyer doesn't know. So the buyer's going to ask the buyer's agent, who do you recommend? So then the buyer's agent will then make recommendations for turbine inspection, for home inspection, and the seller's agent needs to get a survey done if it's a single-family home. And the surveyor must be contacted by the seller side to say, hey, we have contract in escrow. Can you do a survey for us? So there's a lot of things that are going on that the buyer and the seller have to work on to make this transaction successful. And usually they have 45 days. And you also have to follow with the home inspection and other things that we're going to be talking about in the future. So the role of the escrow officer is very important because they're making sure that all the paperwork is submitted on a timely basis and that the buyer's agent and the seller's agent are diligent in keeping to that timeline, because it's critically important that you get the home inspection done, that you get the termite inspector selected, that the survey is done, that the buyer gets a loan, etc., etc. So it's critical to work closely with the escrow officer, and the escrow officer then will work with the title department to make sure the title is clear so they can get title insurance, which we'll talk about in a future session. So hope you appreciate what the escrow officer does and what the escrow company does in this process of getting the buyer and the seller together and making sure that we have a successful closing. Hope you learned something about the escrow process. Aloha.